I found out my parents are not my real parents. My brother is actually my father, and my grandparents let my mother bleed to death after giving birth to me. Now the whole town knows. My name is Luke. I'm 25-year-old. I always thought my family was a little off, but I chalked it up to small-town weirdness, the kind of quirks you grow up around and convince yourself are normal. My dad, Robert, was your typical stern, blue-collar man, all silence and whiskey. My mom, Denise, was the anxious peacemaker, always tense, always whispering on the phone when she thought I wasn't listening. And then there was my older brother, James. He was the golden boy, the quarterback, ladies' man, dad's pride and joy. I was the quiet one, the writer, the listener, the one who stayed behind when he went off to college, then the army, and then came back with a haunted stare and a drinking problem he refused to acknowledge. A few months ago, I got sick. Not just a cold, really sick. Liver failure. The doctors said it was genetic, something I'd inherited. I needed a transplant. Fast. Emily, my girlfriend, was the only light I had left. She stayed by my side through the hospital visits, the sleepless nights, the fear. She even offered to get tested, to see if she could be a donor. That's the kind of person she was. An angel. And then everything changed. She stopped answering my calls, moved out of our apartment while I was at a doctor's appointment. Blocked me on everything. No warning, no explanation. Just gone. I thought I'd done something wrong. I blamed myself. Until, weeks later, I finally reached one of her friends. And what she told me shattered everything I thought I knew about my life. Emily had found something, a secret I didn't even know existed. While packing, she'd stumbled across my birth certificate. Only, it didn't match. My mother's name wasn't Denise. My father's name wasn't Robert. In fact, they weren't my parents at all. The document had been altered, scrubbed, tampered with. When Emily confronted them, they didn't offer explanations. They gaslighted her, called her paranoid, said she was unstable. But Emily trusted her gut, and she kept digging. What she found next, I still don't know, because after that, she vanished completely, and that's where my story really begins. It turns out, I wasn't my parents' biological son. I was James. My brother was actually my father. He was 17 when I was born. The truth came out in fragments, like puzzle pieces I never knew I was missing. James had gotten his high school girlfriend pregnant. Her name was Sarah. Sarah died during childbirth. My grandparents were ashamed. A scandal like that would have destroyed their image in our tight-knit town. Denise, the woman I had called mom all my life, had just miscarried her third pregnancy and was mentally unraveling, so they made a decision. A deal. They adopted me, faked the paperwork, stitched together a new narrative. Denise would raise me as her own, and James, just a boy himself, would go off to college, then the army, and pretend like none of it ever happened. And I became the family's deepest secret, a living, breathing reminder of everything they wanted to forget. Emily found out, and instead of telling me, she confronted them first. She waited, gave them a chance to come clean. They didn't. Then came the second blow. She found out I had cheated on her. Months earlier, during a brutal fight, one night, a stupid, drunken mistake I'd buried in guilt. That betrayal broke her. She told me she couldn't save someone who didn't value her trust. And she walked away knowing the truth, and let me keep living the lie. I confronted my family in the kitchen. My hands were shaking, my voice, barely a whisper. I told them everything I knew. My father didn't even blink. Denise crumbled. She cried and begged me not to tell anyone. Kept saying, I raised you. I loved you like my own. As if that erased the lies. And James, my father, my brother, my ghost, just stared, emotionless, until I said the one thing that finally cracked his mask. Why didn't you ever come back for me? That night, I packed my things and left, but I didn't disappear. I investigated, dug through archives, interviewed old neighbors, tracked down Sarah's remaining family, even found a retired midwife who remembered the night she died. The truth was worse than I imagined. Sarah didn't just die, she was left to die. She had complications during labor, and the family refused to take her to the hospital. They were terrified of exposure, afraid of what the town would say. So they let her bleed out on a mattress in a locked bedroom. She died in pain, alone, forgotten, and they buried the truth with her, until now. I hired a lawyer, I mailed anonymous letters to local journalists, attaching copies of documents, names, dates, testimonies. I filed a wrongful death investigation request, using their real names, real locations, real guilt. I went nuclear, and as I stood in the wreckage of the only family I'd ever known, I realized something. Sometimes, blood doesn't bind you. Sometimes, it stains you, and I was done bleeding for people who never once bled for me. The first story broke 3 weeks after I mailed the letters. It started small. A local blog post titled, "The Quiet Scandal of Elmridge, a Death Long Forgotten." At first, no one knew it was about my family, but then the second article dropped. This one had names: James Matthews, Sarah Holloway, and an anonymous whistleblower alleging that Sarah's death was covered up by her boyfriend's family to avoid public disgrace. The town went silent. Then it exploded. Old classmates started messaging me. Their words soaked in disbelief. "Is this true? Wait, weren't your parents? Weren't you just the little brother?" Reporters showed up on the front lawn, cameras rolling. Someone spray-painted murderers across our white fence. My dad, the man I once called father, refused to leave the house. He sat on the porch with a shotgun across his lap like it was still the 1960s. Like intimidation could bury the truth. Mother had a breakdown. She was taken to a private hospital outside of town. The media called her mentally unstable, but they didn't know the half of it. She had been living a double life for decades. Mother by law, accomplice by silence. And James? James vanished. One day, he was there. The next, gone. No note left. No forwarding address. Just gone. But he didn't stay hidden. I found out later that he checked himself into a rehab center 2 states away. A last-minute attempt at redemption, but it was too little, too late. The truth had already ripped through everything we were taught to protect: reputation, legacy, image. None of it mattered now. What mattered was Sarah, the girl who died alone. The mother I never got to meet. Her sister, a woman named Grace Holloway, reached out to me after reading the articles. She was 14 when Sarah died, too young to understand, too old to forget. We met in a quiet diner off the highway. She slid a photo across the table, a picture of Sarah, pregnant, standing in front of the lake that bordered our town. She looked like me. For the first time in my life, I saw my face in someone else. Grace was calm, but her voice cracked as she spoke. "I always knew something wasn't right. Your grandparent told us she ran off, that she couldn't handle being a mother, that she was ashamed, but I never believed it. She told me Sarah wanted to name me Eli. She had written it in a notebook. If it's a boy, I'll name him Eli, short for Elijah, strong, gentle, kind." I didn't cry at first, not in front of her. But that night, I sat in my car outside the diner, clutching the photo, and I wept like a child, because I had a name before they gave me one. A mother before they erased her, and a truth that had waited my whole life to be found. I cry myself to sleep. The next morning I decided to find out how my real father was doing in the rehab center. Then I found out his under fake name. They called him Mark Holloway. It was the only part of him still honest. The last name of the girl he left to die. The staff thought he was just another ex-soldier with PTSD and a drinking problem. But he was also something worse. A man who spent his whole adult life pretending he wasn't a father. He didn't speak for the first 2 weeks, just stared out the window during group sessions. Scribbling in a notebook he never let anyone read. He refused visitors, ignored calls. Not even the lawyer I sent to serve him would get a response. One night, a counselor named Theo sat beside him during lights out. No pressure, no clipboard, just quiet, and James finally spoke. "I buried my son before he ever called me dad." Theo didn't interrupt, didn't press. James kept going. "They told me it was best, that Denise needed it more than I did, that I'd ruin his life if I stayed. So I left, first for college, then the army, then everywhere else that wasn't home." His voice was hoarse from years of whiskey and silence. But I watched him grow, from a distance, every birthday, every broken arm, every school play. I was there, just not there. Theo asked him something simple: "Why didn't you tell him?" James shook his head. "Because I didn't know how to be a father. I only knew how to be a lie." That night, James didn't sleep. He stayed up writing letters. One to me, one to Sarah, one to himself. The letter to Sarah was the hardest. He apologized for letting fear decide her fate, for watching her bleed and not screaming louder, for choosing silence over love, for hiding behind his parents like a coward. He wrote, "You deserved a hospital, a doctor, a future. Instead, you got me." And to me, the son he never claimed, he wrote, "I don't deserve forgiveness, but I do owe you the truth, every painful, bloody piece of it. I was 17 and scared, but fear is no excuse for what I did. I let them take you. I told myself I was giving you a better life, but maybe I was just giving myself an easier one." He signed it, "James, not your brother, not your father, just the man who failed at both." He didn't send it, not right away. Instead, he folded the pages and kept them in his wallet, carried them like a wound. He stayed in rehab for 90 days, and when he walked out, sober and thin and hollow-eyed, he wasn't a changed man, just an honest one, for the first time in his life. James didn't go home, mostly because he didn't have one. Instead, he took a bus to the edge of the city, a grey place between nowhere and nothing, and rented a room above a bait shop. No TV, no Wi-Fi, just a bed, a desk, and a window that faced an alley choked with trash. That's where he stayed. Writing journals, letters, lists of apologies he'd never deliver. Every morning, he made 2 black coffees, one for himself, one he left on the empty chair across from him. Like a ritual for a ghost, on the 27th morning, he picked up the wallet. The pages inside were soft from folding, the ink faint in places where his thumb traced the words. Then he made a decision, not for redemption. He didn't believe in that, but for truth. He found my address, not hard. I was easy to find when you knew the last name, and he sent the letter, no return address, no explanations, just the pages, creased and smelling faintly of coffee and old regret. I didn't read it right away. I let it sit on the counter, staring at me like a dare. 3 days passed before I tore it open. His handwriting was worse than I imagined, but the pain was clear. Every loop of every letter was bleeding. I read every word, then read it again, and when I was done, I wasn't sure if I hated him more or pitied him, but I did know one thing. He was still alive, still out there, and whether he liked it or not, I was going to find him, because I deserved more than a letter. I deserved a face to go with the failure, and maybe, just maybe, he deserved to hear what I had to say, in person. While I was trying to locate his house, he sent another letter. The letter came in a plain white envelope, no return address, no stamp. It was slipped under the door of the motel I'd been staying in. Quietly, like a ghost had delivered it. I stared at it for a long time. The handwriting was unmistakable. Inside were 3 pages, folded once, no preamble. Just his words, his truth. "I never had the right to be your father, so I pretended to be your brother. But the lie cost me more than the truth ever could. I watched you grow from the shadows. Birthdays, school plays, hospital visits. I was always just out of frame, pretending that was enough. I thought I was protecting you, but maybe I was protecting myself, from guilt, from the shame of Sarah, from the memory of blood on my hands and silence in my mouth. There is no apology that can erase what I did, but you deserve to know that I loved her, and I love you, not as an obligation, as a fact I've carried like a fracture for 25 years. If you want to see me, even if it's to scream, even if it's to spit in my face, I'll be at the old Holloway cabin on Hollow Creek Road. I've already spoken to Sarah's sister. Do what you must. I'll be there. I won't run this time." He signed it, "James, your father. If you'll have me, your mistake, if you won't." I read it twice, then a third time, and suddenly, I didn't feel rage, not immediately, just the deep, hollow ache of grief for the life I never had. The father I never knew. The mother who died calling my name as she bled out. James stood on the porch of the Holloway door 2 days later, waiting. Grace Holloway answered the door. She hadn't seen him in decades. She stared at him like she was trying to place a face on a nightmare. "You've got some nerve showing up here," she said. James nodded. "I know." Grace led him inside without offering coffee, without offering comfort, just silence. I went to Grace that day and saw everything. I wasn't ready to face him yet, so I watched him from a distance instead. The cabin smelled of cedar and dust and old grief. Sarah's photo was on the mantel, the same one Grace had shown me. James couldn't look at it. "I told you I wasn't ready to forgive you," Grace said, her voice trembling. "And I'm still not, but I want to hear you say it, out loud, not in a letter." James swallowed, then said, "I let her die." The words fell like bricks. She needed help, and I listened to my parents instead of doing what was right. I thought keeping her death quiet would save my future. Instead, I buried hers, and I buried my son's life with it. Grace's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. Instead, she handed him a dusty old box. Inside were Sarah's journals, drawings, letters she never sent, even a baby blanket with the name Eli stitched in blue thread. She was scared, James. But she wanted that baby more than anything. The baby, she talked about naming him Elijah. She wanted him to be strong, even if she wasn't. James held the blanket like it was made of glass. I don't deserve any of this, he whispered. Grace looked at him for a long time. No, you don't. But he does, my nephew, your son. He deserves the truth. He deserves to choose what to do with it. That night, James left the cabin with Sarah's box in the passenger seat. He didn't know if I'd meet him. He didn't know if I'd ever forgive him. But for the first time in his life, he was no longer running and somewhere. A truth that had been buried for 25 years was finally starting to breathe. James drove through the night with the box seat belted beside him. Like it might fall apart if he didn't. Every few miles, he'd glance at it. As if half expecting Sarah's ghost to crawl out and finish the conversation Grace had started. But the ghost never came, only memories. I drove slowly, following behind him. When I noticed he was heading to my house, I sped up and drove past him and got home before him. When the sun broke over the horizon, he was parked outside my apartment complex. He hadn't planned it. Hadn't even realized where he was going. His hands rested on the steering wheel until the heat of the morning burned his knuckles. Then he saw me, standing on the curb, coffee in hand, watching him like I'd been waiting all night. Though the truth was, I'd been waiting all my life. I didn't wave, didn't move, just stared, and James, or whoever he was to me, opened the car door. He didn't bring the box, just stood there, hollow and unsure. I crossed the lot slowly, stopping just out of reach. We looked at each other for the first time without a window, a letter, or someone else's grief between us. Then I asked, "What do you want?" James swallowed hard. "I don't know if I'm allowed to want anything from you." I nodded. "Fair enough. Then why are you here?" His voice cracked. "To stop hiding." For a long time, I didn't say anything. The silence stretched so thin it might have snapped. Then I said, "There's a diner up the road. You hungry?" James looked surprised, like he thought the next words out of my mouth would be a punch or a curse. But he nodded. "Yeah, I'm hungry." We walked to the diner in silence. I didn't know if this was the start of something, or just two broken men pretending to be human for an hour over eggs and coffee, but I knew this. I didn't have to forgive him, not today. Maybe not ever, but I wasn't going to be the one running anymore, and neither was he. We didn't talk much after that day, but something shifted. Maybe it wasn't forgiveness. Maybe it never would be. But it was a beginning, the kind built on the jagged edges of truth. I carried Sarah's box home. I read every journal, every letter she never sent. I memorized her handwriting like it might vanish again if I didn't. I learned her laugh through Grace's stories. I learned her fears through her pages. I learned that she dreamed of naming me Elijah, Eli, because she wanted me to be strong, and I was tired of pretending I wasn't. I was done carrying other people's silence, so I gathered everything. The journals, the drawings, the unsent letters, every record I'd uncovered. Every proof that my life was built on bones no one wanted to claim. When the case reopened, I stood in court. Shaking, sweating, but certain, I testified. Not for them, not for the dead, for me. I spoke the truth, piece by piece. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I just told it. Calm, clear, ruthless. I burned down the lie they built, one match at a time. Emily never came back, and I don't blame her. She loved someone who didn't love himself enough to be honest. I betrayed her trust. I didn't just lose her. I drove her away, but even in her absence, she gave me the spark I needed to start digging. The truth hurt, but at least it was mine now. No more secrets, no more pretending. I wasn't just born from a lie. I was the lie, but now I've made peace with it. Healing wasn't loud. It didn't come with epiphanies or perfect closure. It came in quiet moments. A photo of Sarah on my nightstand. No longer a stranger, but my mother. Long walks without headphones, just breathing. Therapy sessions where I cried in silence, and then in sobs. Journals filled with letters I'll never send. To James, to Emily, to Sarah, and to myself. Grace Holloway and I speak often. She sends me stories about Sarah. We laugh sometimes. We cry more often. But in her, I found family not bound by blood, but by pain, by memory, by truth. James still writes me. Sometimes I read the letters, sometimes I don't. He's trying. I don't know if I'll ever call him Dad. But maybe one day, I'll stop calling him James. As for Robert and Denise, they're shadows now, haunting their own house of lies, and I live quietly in another town. No big announcements, no drama, just peace, real peace because I finally stepped out of the lie and built a life in the open. Subscribe for more stories. Thank you.